let us begin. Yes, I'm me. I think most of you know me. So that's enough for now. And I'm sure that you probably remember last year I spent the last several years of my life pursuing the Munyon and Lamunyon family in America and writing a large book about it. But I presented the stories of James Munroe Munyon, who was the patent medicine guy. You may have seen some of that one. And Curtiss Munyan, who was the guy on the submarine in World War II that helped secure the Japanese Navy war plan, which was a great help in the Pacific. So these Munyons, I did almost 500 nuclear family sketches. So there's a lot of Munyons out there. In fact, the last time I said something about this to Sharon, she said, "More Munyons?" Yeah, yes, and they're amazing Munyons. Yeah, loosely defined. So this last year, in the last year, the book that I put together was accepted and it's put on the digital library at Family Search. And I learned so much about what you could find in there in very arcane places, but very easily, that I want to spend part of today talking about that digital library and how to get into it and how to use it. And then secondly, I will give you 4 amazing Munyons, but in much shorter form than I did the other 2. So we're not going to be here till 6 o'clock, don't worry. So first of all, the digital library at Family Search. How many of you have one of the free accounts at Family Search? Okay, that's almost everybody. I can tell you if you have it that you will not get harassed by emails asking for money or whatever. It's a very benign place and very helpful. And they have the world's largest library of genealogical material in the world. And they have, as you can see, the digital library has over 600,000 newsletters, books, and maps. And about half of those the public can access online from the comfort of your own home. So that's pretty amazing. This is ones that they microfilmed over the years, and now they've been digitized, so they're very searchable. And as you will see, things are easy to find and easy to pinpoint exactly what you're looking for. And they are items that you would not necessarily expect to find anywhere else because you wouldn't even know about them. So, how to access the digital library. So you have to have the free account, as I said. And after you have logged into that account, here's what you will find. This is the home page. And what you want to do is go to search, which is there on the menu bar. And then that's a drop-down menu, and you want to go down to books. So it's all these are other, you can search records, you can search images, you can search on the family tree, but books is the one we're going to talk about today. This is the digital library. So you start by entering a search. This is the first window within the digital library search. And you can scroll down a little bit here to see other items, but there's a search here, and you can just enter a name or a place in that box. And I recommend that you scroll down, and there's a pop-up or drop-down menu, and select full permission and limited permission. And there's one that you can't see on here, but it says public, and I recommend you check that. This will eliminate out of that 600,000 items the ones that you're not allowed to look at unless you're on site or whatever. And I'm not going to go to Salt Lake City just to do that. So there's plenty in there that's public. So these will make it a lot easier to find the ones you want in there. It kind of cuts the numbers down. So if you get too many hits. So, for example, just doing Munyon, you get like 1,800 records, and that's a whole lot to look through. So you can add a subject under subject. You can put a location in there. And this particular search, which doesn't show what I put in there, brought my number of 1,800 Munyon references to 115, and I haven't been able to duplicate it, so I'm not sure exactly what I put in there. I got several that were close, but unfortunately, the Munyons scattered out over about 43 of the 49, 50 states, or maybe more. So, you'd have to put in a whole lot of states and try to get them everywhere. But so that's an easy way to cut the numbers down where it's more reasonable. And you do that by first clicking here where it says Advanced Search, and then into the search window for subject. If you do this first, it'll give you a whole list of subjects, and you have to pick one. But this way, you can just write it in yourself, so you're not scrolling through hundreds of different subject categories. So now that you know how to search, let's see what you do when you get the results. So this is the first item that came up when I searched under Munyons. You might recognize the title. And it even says you who the author is. And I was active in 2024. I haven't been active in 2025. So they cut it off there. That's what it was when I was actually going back and forth with them. By the way, if you have a copy, your items that you're submitting are things you did yourself, those are under copyright, and they will request that you indicate that they're allowed to put that up there and that people can see it. So you've got full control if you ever wanted to use that. And Dana's got his Thibodeau book up there, maybe others, I don't know. And so he could take with that too. So this just tells you a little bit about what the thing is. It's 2 volumes, a total of 606 pages. Gosh, it sure seemed a lot longer than that. And then you'll see it down here. It says view inside, but they give you a little teaser. They give you a little bit of text results, and you can scroll down and get more. And obviously, since this is a search on the word Munyon, if you see more, you'd see the whole book, which is what we're going to go look at right now. After we view inside, we get a window that looks like this. And this is the part I can't get to come up on my computer now. I don't know why. Have you had that problem lately? No? I think it's Bill Gates messing with my Windows 10. Okay, so it's not just Family Search is slow. It's just they're doing something to be obstreperous. So this is the title page. And you have information here. Notice it mentions the copyright and all that stuff. Some of the statuses that they have, people that have given them permission for you to read it, but not to download, or to read it, but not to copy it. You can't cut and paste. So that's why I said just put public up there, and you'll get plenty of things to look at. So the search window has several features that you're going to want to use. This one in the corner here is the page, what do they call it? The page viewer. It tells you what page you're on. So if you find out that you want to go to page 300, you can just write that in the box and it'll take you to that page. Also, you can zoom in, zoom out. And lastly, we have the search window, the famous magnifying glass up there. So I wanted to point out where these things are and what you could do to that. So I did a search within this book on the word Calvin. And that's because my great-grandfather was Calvin Davis, who married Frances or Fanny Lamunyon. So I knew he was in there because I put him in there. But Calvin actually showed up with 14 results. And each one will show you, and you could scroll down. This is all done. This is not live, so I can't do that here. But you can scroll down and get all the different pages where that name appears and a little preview. So this shows you here that on here in Jewell County, that's directly the same as what you see in the text. And then this is based on whichever one you're looking at down here, and then you can continue. And they tell you what page that appears on, so you have some idea where in the book you're going to find that particular image of Calvin. So there are lots of items in the digital library that will not be familiar to the researcher. I'm going to show you 3, and this is where I'm trying to convince you to make sure that you use this in your own research. So one of the ones I came across was the Franson Family History of Erie County, Ohio, by Florence Ruth Franson. Sounds like one of those ordinary family genealogies, right? But when that appeared in that list, then I go to view the stuff that's in here and search on Munyon, and guess what I found? She's got 38 search results in here on Munyon, including a transcription of a family Bible, which included records of births, marriage, and deaths, as you would ordinarily see. And there were also abstracts of various land transactions in here involving Munyons, hidden in a book about the Fransons. I wonder why that is. Oh, her maternal great-grandmother was a Lamunyon. But it's not in the name. You wouldn't pick this one off the shelf. But Family Search's digital library found it for you. It's a lot of good stuff. Verifies all those dates of when these kids were born and who they married and when. What a great source to cite. The second one, My Pioneer Families of Vernon County, Wisconsin. That's up a ways. By Ada Stody Barron. Volume 2, there's actually 4. She did a book about her maternal great-grandparents, or maternal great-grandparents, basically 4 sets of ancestors. And in volume 2, she discusses the Munyon connection. And there are 53 references to Munyons in this book, all within her wing of the family, because her great-grandmother, like the other one, was a Munyon. So you get a lot of information readily, and you can scroll from page to page within the book. It tells you which ones to look at. You don't have to read the whole thing. And get those references and the interesting things that you find out. So for example, the third my example is, as it was told to me, this was a series of printed up stories that were in the local newspaper in Agra, Kansas. Agra has a population of, let's see, I wrote this down, 208. It was probably a little more prosperous, 100 years ago. So who knew? And she said in here, yes, there were more Munyons in the telephone book of Agra. Everybody here knows what a telephone book is, right? Maybe not Sharon. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's true. She's even got some upstairs. So there were more Munyons in the telephone book of Agra, Kansas than even Smiths or Jones. There was one Munyon guy that moved out there and had like 9 kids, and they all stayed there and had farms and businesses and stuff, and they just filled up the phone book in the area. And how would you find that? It's near, I think near Kansas, along the border there, or Nebraska. It's out at, population 200. They probably had like 500 people when she wrote the book. But the point is, a lot of resources. It didn't take you a whole lot to find them, and you can get all those interesting stories. Who they came in the covered wagon and all that kind of stuff. They're local stories that if you didn't know to look in Agra, you'd never find it. So very amazing. So any questions about this part so far? Yes. You can, and I should have mentioned that. I had it in my notes. They have various, you put it in quotation marks. So one of the things I did was to search on like William Munyon, and you get just the ones with William Munyon. But you want to make sure you use the quotation marks. Otherwise, you get all the Lamunyons and all the Williamses. So yeah, that works. Yes. I'm not sure I understand your question, Karen. Oh, okay. Well, that's the same thing as if you find them in a regular record. You have to just look at all the different, trace them down, do chronologies and all that kind of thing to try to separate them. Yeah, the books don't say, this is not the one that Maud talked about in her book. Did I see another? Yeah, Dana? Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Well, you could. Yeah, you could. You could. Yeah. Yeah. It's violation of federal law, but we won't turn them in. Yeah. Only if you sell your books. You might get the exception otherwise. Yeah. So any other questions? Okay, let's talk about Munyons. Oh, we're going to have an early break today. I thought this would be slower. We don't have so many people here to ask questions. So now we're ready for part 2, where we're going to have more amazing Munyons. But, yes, what? Oh, well, the word Munyon is a French word, and it means the stump from an amputation. I thought I had told you that before. This group left, they were on the Isle of Jersey, which is part of the Channel Islands, which are not really in the Channel, but that's what they're called, right off the coast of Normandy. And they speak a variation of Norman French from the 1600s. And somewhere there must have been like Pierre, and there were like 2 Pierres. And so this was the Pierre who had an amputation. And he was Pierre Lamunyon. And that's what they used as their surname. That's my theory anyway, but that's what it means. And interestingly, when they came over here, they only used Munyon. But one branch of the family kind of stayed with that. And then the other branch of the family, they started adding the pronoun back. So you notice the one reference to Le Munyon, which is correct, but a lot of them ended up with Lamunyon, which is the wrong gender. But it's easier to spell. There are about 12 different ways to spell it, with or without A's and E's and I's and O's and all that. But thank you for the question. So let me begin with a brief review. Here we have the first Munyon in America, who was born about 1640 on the Isle of Jersey. And the first record of him in America was a deed in 1666 showing that he was living a few miles south of Boston. I think, forget, Canton, Massachusetts, something like that. I've forgotten the name of the town. He was a weaver, and he had 2 sons. Interesting, back since we're running kind of early. Charles II. If you know your English history, or even if you don't, it's Charles I and James I, right? James was not very popular. In fact, he got so excited he lost his head. And Charles was his son. So, okay, but this is Charles II. It's James's son who fled to Paris, but on the way, he stopped at the Isle of Jersey. And this particular island had been part of the 100 Years' War with all of the different French and English battles back and forth, and ended up that England only had the Channel Islands as part of their property, and the King of France had everything else. So he stopped off at the Isle of Jersey, just went along with Guernsey, And he was treated so well by the people there that when he got onto the throne as Charles II king, he gave to some of the local officials a lot of land in America. I mean, empty land, right? And so the guy that got the land decided to call it New Jersey. And that's where that got its name, because that part of the grant was from Charles, who really appreciated saving his life, basically, because they fought off a Puritan navy that came down to try to capture the young guy. And he got restored back to the throne about 1660, I think. So that's why he was born, this guy was born about 1640, so he was living through this whole time period. And so this became a popular place to go from folks from over there. And so the first one, William, and if you look online, like in their Find a Grave, they will say that William was married to this woman, but the woman apparently died like 80 years after all this, back in England, and her record is using her maiden name, which kind of seemed a little odd to me. So I don't think that that's, I mean, I think somebody went in there and went, oh, that must have been her. She's got the right name, you know. Anyway, so this guy had the two sons, Edward and Thomas, who were the two volumes of the book, one for each. So a little diversion here. How many people have seen the play, The Crucible, or read The Crucible, the play by Arthur Miller, written in 1953? What was going on in the U.S. in 1953 in the Senate? Yes, Mr. McCarthy was acting up, asking, challenging a lot of people. He was the original, yes, this is a witch hunt guy. So Arthur Miller, who was one of the people who was called in to testify as part of what they called the Hollywood 10, who all lost their ability to do any work there, at least under their real name. They got a little help under the table. So he wrote this play based on the Salem witchcraft trials. And this is an allegory of what happens when you have authority that goes amok and what happens to the people. So that was the play. It was an allegory on the McCarthy hearings. The hero of the play was a man by the name of John Proctor, who was a real, this guy, Miller researched it for a year before writing the play. So John Proctor and his third wife, Elizabeth, were central characters in this play. And the whole thing hinges on who's going to be willing to tell the truth and who will lie to save the other. So if you've seen it, that's the whole drama of the thing. And John ends up getting hanged because he says, everyone knows, you know, he was not popular. He tended to sue people and encroach on their property and stuff. But people liked Elizabeth. So he said, well, ask my wife. Everyone knows that she, unlike me, who doesn't go to church because I don't like the minister, she is an honest person and she will tell you the truth that I am not a witch. And so she went in and she said, to save him, said, yes, he's a witch, because once you say you are, then you have a good chance of surviving. Because the test was to throw you into the river, and if you sunk, oh, I guess you were a witch. So anyway, so these are the main characters, John Proctor and his wife Elizabeth. Elizabeth was also charged with witchcraft, and she was going to be executed, but she was pregnant. And the baby was innocent. So they saved her until after she delivered. Now, in real life, the real John Proctor was 60 at the time of the trials, and she was 42, but she was pregnant. And their daughter, Sarah, had been born 15 years before that. In 1677, Sarah was also called to testify, but they never accused her of being a witch. She was one of those girls that acted crazy and stuff, although I don't know that she did necessarily. Well, after Proctor was executed, Elizabeth and the rest of the family moved to Lynn, Massachusetts. And in about 1700, Sarah Proctor married in Lynn, Massachusetts to a dude named Edward Munyon. So our first aMazing Munyon of the day is Edward, who married one of the Salem folks. He had been living in Salem. He was born around somewhere in the early 1680s. His records are pretty thin. And he was a weaver, like his father, the original William. Edward was born in the 1680s. He was a weaver like his father. He had settled in Salem, but there wasn't enough demand for his skills to make a living. So after he married Sarah a few years later, 1721, he packed up and moved to Northeast Connecticut. And that's where he and most of his descendants continued to stay. So they didn't move around much. And he used Munyon. Now, Edward had a brother named Thomas, the younger brother, born in the late 1680s. Probably a weaver, but that's only by circumstance. We know that Thomas's son was a weaver, so you figure this is a skill that's in the family. There's just no record of whether he was or wasn't. He lived near Dartmouth, Mass., and he moved to a town called Tiverton between 1628 and 1637. And there was a big boundary dispute between Massachusetts and Rhode Island at this time. It was finally settled in 1746, and Rhode Island got Tiverton and a whole bunch of other little towns along the river. So that's where Mr. Munyon, later Lamunyons and Lamunyons, came from. Thomas had a son. This is now the grandson of the original William, born in 1728 in Dartmouth, and he died in 1803. So he lived a nice long life, and he was definitely a weaver like his grandfather. And Samuel had 9 children. One of them was my direct ancestor, but it wasn't this one. Sarah was Thomas Munyon's granddaughter. So if you got that, you got William the immigrant, you got Thomas, then you have Samuel, now you have Sarah, the granddaughter of the grandson. And she was born about 1761 in Tiverton. And according to one of those 3 references I showed you, she never married, but she had at least 3 children, proving that you don't have to be married, if that was ever a question. So this was a little scandalous. We don't know who the fathers of the first 2 were, maybe 1, maybe 2 fathers. Richard, born in 1782. This is the error I found because I had her being born in 1791. Unlikely. So I found it was actually 61. Typo. So one in 1782 and another one born in 1784. We don't know who their father was. But there's a third. And there was, at that time, a traveling Baptist minister named Peleg Burroughs, whose journals have all been printed and digitized and available. And he would tell you every day where he was and who he was with and, you know, what he preached. Test myself. So Peleg came by in 1789 and gave a profession of faith. Said, you know, she was going to be good from now on. So he baptized her, and all was good. Well, there was this elder named Elder Samuel Eads, and her previous practices just kind of took the fore. And so Reverend Burroughs, a few years later, received a report that she delivered a 3rd child after running away with Elder Samuel Eads, who was also a married man. So Peleg decided to investigate. He had a solemn sitting with Sarah. He summoned Elder Eads, but Eads didn't show up. Can't imagine why. So that afternoon, after talking with Sarah, Burroughs put away Samuel Eads and Sarah Lamunyon from among us, basically shunning them from the community because of this lascivious behavior, pretty well documented by being the 3rd child. Reminds me of another story with a different branch of my family, but I won't go into that. So this was I guess, amazing. It would have been amazing if she'd been born in 1791, but this was amazing enough that she was in the books for that. So Sarah had a brother whose name was Thomas Lamunyon, and he served in the Rhode Island militia in 1779 and 1780. So we got one side of, one part of the family that's a little not keeping the rules, and another one that goes out and he's a patriot. And for his military service, Thomas received an annual pension of $36.66, which I guess was a pretty good amount of money in those days. And he got that until his death in 1849, when he was 85 years old. And he had a widow named Lydia, who got another pension for a few years until she died. But along the way, she had at least 14 children that we have identified. And interesting sidelight to this, if you go to, well, at the archives, they have pension records for all these people from the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, and the Civil War. And a lot of them have been digitized by an organization called Fold 3, which is now part of Ancestry. And so you can search the records, and they had to have affidavits. She's got to prove that she's actually his wife, and that her Samuel was the same as the other Samuel, or Thomas, I'm sorry. And so they'll have affidavits from military officials and from buddies from the militia. And one of the affidavits in there is by their oldest daughter, who also was Salome. And she said, well, I've always understood that I was the first of 19 children. I think they lost count somewhere along the line, but I think also a lot of them probably died young. And so they didn't get counted, and they didn't have all this stuff written down, How many of you had? Oh, let's see, there's so. She got up to 14, but the daughter said that she thought there were actually 19 altogether, and she was the oldest, so maybe she was more knowledgeable than Mom, who was a little busy. So that's just kind of an interesting little vignette story from the records. And his widow then, Thomas's widow, received the pension until she died in 1852. So that's, war ended in what, 1781? So we're talking 70 years later, and people are still getting pensions from this war, which is great. So that's aMazing Munyon number 3. We had Edward, who married the Proctor witch, and we had Sarah, who had little ones all over the place, and then we have Thomas, who also had little ones all over the place, but he intermittently was busy back in the militia and got a nice pension in response to it. So number 4 is coming. The Republican Party was founded in about 1854 by elements of the Whig Party, the anti-slavery party. That was Abraham Lincoln was involved with them. And then a group called the Free Soil Party. They were anti-slavery. And they combined and got in meetings around the various parts of the country. And the name Republican came from the meeting in Ripon, I think is how they say it, Wisconsin, March 20th of 1854. And have you ever heard of the Ripon Republicans? They will refer to that, and these are more like mainstream, old line Republicans. And they had their first statewide convention in different states, but the first one was in Jackson, Michigan on July 5th of 1854. And one of those in attendance at the first Republican convention was Ira Lamunyon. aMazing Munyon. And he was 27 at the time. Ira Walker Lamunyon was born 1827, hence 27 in 1854, if you're good on the math. He was a grandson of the Revolutionary War veteran Thomas Lamunyon, who we just read about. And when he was 3 years old, the family moved to Shiawassee County, Michigan. Notice where the convention was held, in Jackson, Michigan. This is not far. And he became a civil engineer as well as being a farmer. This guy is amazing, really amazing. In those days, the Congress had passed a series of laws granting bounty lands to men who had served in the U.S., should be served in the U.S. military, in like the Mexican War and some of these others. And a lot of these people that got these bounties didn't really want to move. They were happy where they were, so they sold them. Well, I don't know where he got all the money, but Ira bought 19 of these warrants of land that were during and some immediately after the Civil War. He just kept buying this one and that one and the other one. I guess they're probably all in the same general area, I would think. So in 1870, according to the census, his real property was valued at $12,000, which was far more than the neighbors that were also listed in that same area. But he's not done. In 1882, he and his family moved to Clear Creek County, Colorado. And that had been a part of a gold rush in 1859, and he's there like almost 25 years later. And he found some pieces of gold ore that led him to discover a previously unknown rich ore lode, gold. And so now he's got all this land, and now he's got all this gold. But he died in 1909 at the age of 82, and it was widely reported in the newspapers throughout the U.S., but it wasn't because of the gold rush. It was because he was at that Republican convention. He was the last surviving person, as far as they know, who attended that first Republican convention back in 1854, 6 years before the Civil War started. And it was in like papers all over the country, which told some of those stories. And with that, I'm out of Munyons for the day. Any questions? No more questions? Yeah. They don't track that. Okay, sorry. I didn't know we were doing Zoom. You didn't mention it. How many did we have today? 3. All right. Thank you, Zoom folks. The question was, have I ever gone back to see how many people have looked at my book on the digital library at Family Search? They don't tell you that information. Have you ever seen that, Dana? No. But it does come up first when you do this, probably because it's the last one they got that meets those criteria. His book comes up if you do merge, or Thibodeau. And you can search by the author's name, which helps if you know who the author is. Yes, Deb. How do I get to Munyon? My father's name was Eldon Davis. My grandfather's name was George Davis. My great-grandfather's name was Calvin Davis, who's the one who married Frances Lamunyon that we saw on the slide. So she was my great-grandmother, and Calvin, which I think I've used his photo as one of the show and tell things. A very distinguished-looking guy with a white beard, which is, by the way, coming up in November for you that want to start getting your thoughts together about what you're going to bring for show and tell. You have something, an object or something that's of interest, and you tell stories about it. So yeah, so I'm actually something like the eighth great-great-grandson of the original Lamunyon. I think it's about that far back. I'm 7th or 8th generation. Pardon? No, it goes back. The Mayflower group is a little earlier than that. So I think I have a whole lot of them that are in that generation. I'm like the 12th or some such thing. Other questions? The only family reunion that we have that I've attended, we have a smallish family, was a Davis family reunion that consisted of my wife and I and our two children and their spouses and children. We had, the last time we got together, we do that every 2 years. The last time we had a magnificent total of 13. And my son actually got t-shirts done for the one before that, for the Davis family reunion. But yeah, that's the Lamunyons that I've been tracing, as I said, it's something like 40, maybe 46 or 47 states that they've been in. I mean, even Alaska. So they just sort of, especially the Thomas kids, they just scattered everywhere over time. And probably most of them have no clue about how many other relatives they've got living in other states with that name.
That's a name. I've never heard before. And they're everywhere, but look at families that you can have a heck of a lot of people in a group descended from somebody or other. They just disappear in the mass of.
Uh-huh.
I went to single family.
Uh-huh, yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's like the Howlands, they had 10. So, 10,000 Howlands still around. Oh, there's little fields all over the place. Yeah, yeah. Well, they moved away from New England. That's why I have no ties here, really. Except the Edwards group that lived in Connecticut. That's the poorest county in Connecticut back when they had counties, which they don't anymore. Windham, it's in the northeast corner. Yeah, it's the opposite corner then is down near New York City. But this is it's agricultural, and the land is probably a little better than in Maine, but not much. So not a lot there. And they didn't have as many kids as the Thomas branch that seemed to be a little more prosperous, better farmers or something. And they moved originally, let's say a lot of them moved into New York, across from Connecticut and Massachusetts. And then the Erie Canal came through, and that's when they just exploded. They went out to Ohio and Michigan and Illinois and Indiana and other branches. There's even some that went into the deep South.
The very early ones that they lived in Lynn and ended up in Dartmouth. That's a weird migration to me.
Well, Lynn was the Edward, the guy that married the Proctor girl. Yeah. Well, his father lived south of Boston, but he moved up to Salem, which of course was like the second biggest city at that time, maybe the first biggest. And so he left there and went to Lynn, which is not far from there. It's Essex County. And then from there, they went into Connecticut. Well, Dartmouth was a place that had a lot of records of things that happened in the area around. You ever Rochester, Mass? That's where a lot of this was actually happening, but the records are in the town of Dartmouth. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, but remember, the Thomas branch went just a little west of there into Tiverton, which then became Rhode Island. They would have been Tiverton, Massachusetts, and was until 1741 or whatever that year was. And there was like Little Compton, which is another branch. And no, they made a stop along the way. Yeah. Yeah. But it was all west. Yes, Dana. How many generations I went? Oh, as I said, I think I'm in the 7th generation. So I traced all the people that bore the name Munyon or Lamunyon that were descended from these original two brothers forward all the way to just before living people. I didn't include them in there. I did the research on them, but I didn't include them in the book, and ended up with 492, I think it is, family groups. So it's like 600 pages. That would have been, oh no, that was seven or eight. Yeah. Yeah. But a lot of these, these people were farmers and they were having a bunch of kids. And so, and then, they would move and yeah. And what I did in the book, for each family, if they move to new area like Kansas. So I did the research on that, and I have a little boxed item in there for any time somebody moves into a new area before about 1900. And I say, this is where it is located, generally speaking. This is how big it was when they lived there. Just to give you a kind of a little mental thing. It was too much to try to put maps and stuff in there. I could type a lot faster than I can do all that other stuff. Yes, Deb. We probably could, yeah. We'll have to do that. Yeah, even though that was Edward, so that would have been, uncles, but still cousins. Yeah. Yeah. So. Well, I've done it with all the matches that I have. And first of all, I have a very boring family. Well, except for the Munyons. My most recent immigrant came before the War of 1812. So my folks have been around a long time and not in stories of people coming in and seeing the Statue of Liberty and all of that. No. But it seems that a lot of branches in my family have not done DNA tests. So you got to go with what's in there. So I've got a couple of surname lines where a lot of people have tested from that line. And it's like, oh, another Munyon. Actually, it's not very many Munyons, but certain other lines, there's quite a few.
How far back have you gone? Like first cousin, fifth cousin, how far, have you gone to be?
Well, the DNA is pretty good up. Okay, the question is, how far back have I gone with the DNA matching? Thank you. And Dana, I think, probably could speak to this too. If you go back much before fifth cousin, it's, the little pieces and parts are just not very big anymore. Because each generation, you're only getting half from one line. So, like, I go back to Fanny Lamunyon as my great-grandmother, and what is that? It would be like half to George and a quarter to Eldon, so I would be getting like about an eighth of my DNA from her. That's not very much, or a 16th. Yeah, yeah. I've done a lot of those, building a tree when I have somebody with an interesting name that's a match and is reasonably close. And if they don't have one, or I can get a start and find out maybe the first generation or two, and I can backtrack from there and go, oh yeah, I know who you're related to. It's part of my mother's family back there in Oklahoma. Should we use the microphone? The people on Zoom want to know.
Phoebe Wilson was born in Machias, Maine. My husband is from Kansas. And so when I was doing his work, I came across this great grandmother of his from Maine. And so I followed her back and found that she was also the 10th great grandmother of my Aunt Bev's husband. And Bev has been here before. Mm-hmm. So my husband and her husband are 10th cousins.
Ah.
And he's from Kansas. And the DNA helped with that.
Yeah, the DNA helps. I have found some lines that I did not know the connections, and I've done that with somebody's family. And the interesting one I had was my grandfather was born out of wedlock in rural North Carolina. And his mother was born out of wedlock in rural North Carolina. And when she was born, it turned out that North Carolina has these laws called bastardy laws, and courts where the pregnant woman has to testify as to who the father was, or in some way assure that she can raise this child adequately. So one of the woman's, in this case, the mother, one of her husband's colleagues from the Civil War and who was from the neighborhood and so forth vouched for her because her husband was killed in the Civil War. So my great-great-grandmother had the last name that was her married name, but she was not, it was Morgan, but she was not a Morgan because her father was somebody different. And with DNA, I traced back and saw these lines where all these different people that have the DNA that I'm matching. And it was not big pieces, and I could see, all right, this one is like, this is a cousin to that one. And you kind of trace it back. And what really broke it apart was this one woman that married twice. And I had descendants from both sides. So I knew it's got to be through her. And she was, then you go on back, and they've been around in like New York State and that since the 1700s. So that was definitely a DNA solution. And I identified who I think the actual father was somebody who was exactly the same age as my great-great-grandmother and lived in the same area. They probably went to the same church together. And actually, after my great-grandmother was born, he decided got married and had a child, and they moved down to Georgia and stayed down there because he was a Baptist minister. He wasn't amazing. He wasn't a Munyon. His name was Deweese. So, yeah, the DNA can really help fill in some of those spots. So, more questions? Yes.
As I read that to find your book.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing besides the DNA, Krista Callan of Ancestry has been using Facebook. And she was trying to get together a bunch of her extended family for a family with like 10,000 people, most of which she didn't know. She went to Facebook. Did you search Facebook for your family?
Okay, the question is using Facebook to find relatives. No, I don't do Facebook. And I don't know how reliable. I mean, you can't really tell who else is on there and whether they really know what they're talking about, or this is family history. I got lots of family stories, some of which are true and some of which aren't. You research them and you can find, when document and footnote, there's 6,000 footnotes in these books. So you've got to have that to show that at least that, yes, I saw this and I just didn't make it up or made assumptions. And if you've got a point where you're not really sure, then you need to document, yes, based on this. This is like I did with my great-grandfather, the one that became a Baptist minister. I pretty much figured that it was probably him based on how related I was to the other people in his family, my family, and the fact that he was exactly the same age and lived in the same neighborhood. And my great-grandmother was born in September, which if you go back 9 months, you get to like December, like Christmas time, winter time, party time. And I have a feeling this was probably not a ongoing thing, but maybe a one-off. Who knows? That part I can't prove. But she didn't tell who the father was. And can't really blame her if he's a Baptist minister. Better. Yeah. So, okay. Let's enjoy some of the wonderful goodies brought by Deb and Deb.